So number 8, we're solving the equation using the quadratic formula. And again, this one's very similar to number 7, so I'm going to go a little quicker through this one for a more in-depth explanation of what's happening. Go ahead and check out video number 7, question 7. So first thing we want to do is let's take our given equation and let's put this into standard form for a quadratic. So we want to look for something that is similar to ax squared plus bx plus c. And to do that, we want to go ahead and multiply our given equation by the common denominator so that we can clear this fraction. And again, just like before, it looks like our common denominator is going to be x squared. All right, so when we multiply the equation by our common denominator, we end up with 6 times x squared, which is 6x squared, equals, here this single x will cancel with one of the x's that we're multiplying by, and so we're left with negative 12 times x, so we end up with negative 12x, and here this whole x squared cancels with that whole x squared, and so we're just left with negative 5. And so if we want to make this equation look like standard form, meaning we want the x squared, the x, and the constant on one side, and then that set to 0, well, we can easily make that happen by adding 12x to both sides, and then adding 5 to both sides. And when we do that, we end up with 6x squared plus 12x plus 5 equals 0. And now we can easily see and identify our A, B, and C. So A looks like it's going to be 6, B looks like it'll be positive 12, and C will be positive 5. All right, so let's take these values and plug them into the quadratic formula. So we'll have x equals negative b, and b is 12, plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4a times c, which is 5, all over 2 times a. All right, so let's go ahead and clean this up, simplify a little bit, so we end up with negative 12 plus and minus the square root. Well, 12 squared is positive 144. Here we have negative 4 times 6 is negative 24. Negative 24 times 5 is negative 120, I believe. And all of this is divided now by 12. Here we'll have, let's see, negative 12 plus and minus. Well, 144 minus 120 gives us 24 over 12. And again, just like we did before, let's see, can we break down radical 24? Yeah, I think we can. We can break it into good stuff, bad stuff to help us. So we're looking for the largest perfect square that we can multiply by some other number to get 24. And again, remember your perfect squares, well, let's see, 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, so on and so forth. We have 16, 25, 36, etc. So we're looking for the largest perfect square. So here in this right column, what's the largest perfect square that we can multiply by something else, some non-perfect square, to get 24? Well, I think we can multiply 4, which is a perfect square, times 6, which is obviously not a perfect square, and 4 times 6 does indeed give us 24, so that looks good to me. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to create some room for us here on the left, and using now this radical 4 and radical 6, we'll go ahead and break this down again. So we have, or simplify it rather again, so we have x equals negative 12 plus and minus, and well, we had radical 24, right, but we broke that down into radical 4 times radical 6, and we know that radical 4 can come out as a 2, and then we rewrite what couldn't be broken down, in this case radical 6, divided by 12. All right, and just like before, we want to simplify when all 3 of these numbers, and it has to be all 3, it can't just be 2, when all 3 of these numbers have a common factor that we can reduce by, and again it creates that little triangle, we want to go ahead and reduce. And it looks like, again, we're dealing with 2. We have a negative 12 and then a positive 12. We can reduce by a factor of 2, right? And so 2 goes into itself once, 2 goes into negative 12, negative 6 times, and 2 goes into positive 12, not 12 times, but rather 6 times. All right, so now that we've reduced, let's see, our final answer will be negative 6 plus and minus 1 times radical 6, or just radical 6, all over 6. And so there we have our final answer for number 8. X equals negative 6 plus and minus radical 6 all over 6.